What if the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred relic in all of Judeo-Christian history, was not created in the deserts of Sinai, but drawn from blueprints far older, buried beneath the ruins of a drowned continent? For centuries, scholars, priests, and pilgrims alike have looked to Jerusalem believing the Ark was fashioned by Moses to hold the stone tablets of divine law. But what if the Temple Mount hides more than crumbling stones? What if beneath its foundations lies not just a physical chamber, but a forgotten memory mapped by ancients who walked not just in the Holy Land, but in Atlantis? There's a strange map that reoccurs in forbidden texts and mystical diagrams, one that overlays the Temple of Solomon with geometric proportions not native to Semitic culture. It whispers of sacred symmetry, impossible angles, and stellar alignments. Early mystics called it the pattern of the heavens inscribed in stone, but its form bears no resemblance to Hebrew architecture. It mirrors Atlantean schematics diagrams, long thought to be myth. Let's begin with something unsettling. The Ark is never described in purely religious terms. Its blueprint, as told in Exodus, reads more like the specifications of a machine. Acacia wood, gold overlay inside and out, cherubim with outstretched wings facing a central void. But this is no mere box. It crackles with energy strikes. Down the unworthy emits voices. Why does that sound like technology more than theology? Now consider this: a series of early Jewish mystical texts describe an underground vault beneath the Holy of Holies, an inner chamber never accessed, never confirmed by archaeology, and always protected in oral tradition. A vault not just to store, but to conceal. What did it hide? A celestial engine, a generator of divine frequency. In the Book of Enoch, there is mention of the holy cube that vibrated with the voice of the Most High. But no such cube appears in mainstream scripture. Only in Apocrypha, only in texts banned for centuries. Why? Because this cube was not Jewish. Its dimensions, 1:1, mirror the proportions of Atlantean shrines as described in the Critias and Timaeus dialogues of Plato. A golden structure at the heart of a circular temple surrounded by canals radiating out like circuitry. Here's where the trail gets colder and stranger. In 1909, a U.S. expedition in the Grand Canyon claimed to discover chambers filled with Egyptian and possibly even Tibetan relics, complete with schematics etched into copper walls. Among the forbidden artifacts, a relief showing a radiant chest with winged creatures strikingly similar to the Ark. But this was hushed, discredited, buried by the Smithsonian. Why could this chest have traveled west, escaping the flood? There's a curious echo in Native American traditions, too. The Hopi speak of a sacred box of stars brought by the ant people after the sky world fell into the sea. The box could summon the gods. It hummed, glowed, and only the pure-hearted could touch it. Does this sound familiar? Could all these myths be fragmented memories of the same thing? An ancient object in part? Machine part altar that passed from Atlantis to Egypt? From Egypt to Israel? And what lies beneath the Temple Mount today? It is sacred ground, fiercely protected. Excavation is forbidden. But in the late 1800s, British explorers recorded strange resonance effects, low hums areas where metal instruments vibrated without cause. Some swore the ground itself was charged. Now imagine this. What if the Ark wasn't just stored in the temple, but powered it? What if Solomon's temple was built around a much older Atlantean device? The Hebrew word for Ark Aron also translates to chest or coffer. In Egyptian pyramids, we find coffer boxes in the king's chamber matching the Ark's dimensions exactly. No mummies were found there, no funerary objects, just the box. Empty, waiting. But for what? Some researchers suggest the box was tuned to Earth's frequency, precisely aligned to the resonance of the planet, the stars, and the human body. This echoes the Ark's function to communicate with God, to annihilate enemies, to guide through deserts using divine light. Light, sound, energy? This is not magic. This is forgotten science. So what connects all these? A, sacred pattern, A map encoded not just in scripture, but in architecture, myth, and symbol. And it leads always to a forgotten kingdom lost beneath the waves. A kingdom that once wielded both wisdom and technology in a single breath, Atlantis. And here is the secret few dare to suggest the Ark of the Covenant is not just a Hebrew relic. It is Atlantean legacy renamed and hidden like so much sacred knowledge after the flood. It is the last remaining vessel of a priesthood that once spanned the globe. And beneath the temple sealed in silence, that map remains, waiting to be remembered. Let's journey backward, not in miles, but in memory. Not to Sinai, nor to Jerusalem, but beyond them, far beyond them, to a continent that now sleeps beneath the ocean floor. A world of high towers, crystalline domes, and circular temples gleaming like solar discs, Atlantis. You've been told it was a myth, Plato's fantasy. But what if Atlantis was not just real, but the very origin of the Ark's mysterious power? Picture this, a class of Atlantean priest-scientists, custodians of sacred engineering gathering around a radiant device known only as the heart. It pulsed not with blood, but with resonance, vibrations, light. These weren't sorcerers. They were initiates of harmonic science. They understood the music of the spheres, the language of geometry, the way crystal and gold could store and amplify energy. The Ark in this light was not unique. It was a replica, a simplified version of a lost technology. What do ancient texts tell us about Atlantis? That it was a society divided between spirit and science, the right and left hand of divine expression. That it fell not due to natural disaster alone, but because its sacred instruments were misused. Devices once intended for healing and communication with divine realms became weapons. Sound familiar? The Ark too was feared. It was said to emit fire from the heavens to level walls, to strike the irreverent dead. Its touch was fatal unless mediated by sacred protocol. This is not the behavior of a relic, it is the behavior of a reactor, a resonator, a transmitter of some ancient power. Imagine the priest-scientists, tall, radiant, robed in linen laced with gold, descending into crystal chambers beneath temples of white stone. There, they inscribed patterns onto plates of copper and obsidian shaping geometric lenses to refract light and sound. These lenses were arranged in sacred alignments, channeling Earth's energies like a musical scale. In their center, a golden cube resting on a pedestal adorned with winged beings. And here it is again, the same description as the Ark. Cherubim facing each other, a golden chest, poles for carrying. It hums, it blinds, it sings. This was the first Ark, a prototype created long before Moses walked the sands of Egypt. Now consider this, after the fall of Atlantis, its survivors scattered. One group is said to have gone to the Nile Delta, bringing with them not just memories, but blueprints, encoded in myth, preserved in symbol. The Egyptians speak of Zep-Tepi the first time, a golden age when gods walked among men wielding devices that controlled the elements. Thoth, the god of wisdom, is said to have brought sacred knowledge from a sunken land. He carried not only scrolls, but a vessel of voices which could speak to the stars. Again a box, again a communicator. Did Thoth carry fragments of the original Ark technology? Could this be the same device passed down and renamed, wrapped in new rituals? Look to the architectural legacy. The Ark was always transported with poles never touched directly. It was stored in the Holy of Holies, a room whose proportions mirror those of the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid. This chamber, carved from rose granite, hums at 440 hertz, coincidentally, the same frequency used in Hebrew chanting. Coincidence or ancient calibration. Atlantean engineers understood frequency. They didn't just build temples, they tuned them. They didn't just carve symbols, they programmed them. The same is whispered about the Ark, that it was activated through voice song ritual. And when its resonance matched the cosmic field, it opened. Not like a lid, like a gateway. What if the Ark was not a container, but a portal, a Merkaba, an interdimensional throne? The book of Ezekiel offers a vision of wheels within wheels, living creatures of fire, and a throne above it all, carried by radiant beings. Is this prophecy, or is it memory, a distorted recollection of technology seen once long ago, in Atlantis? Even the dimensions of the ark, 2.5 cubits by 1.5 match harmonic ratios used in sound resonance chambers. These are not arbitrary measurements. They're frequencies encoded in space. And let us not forget the material gold, not chosen for beauty, but conductivity. Gold is a near-perfect conductor of electricity and frequency. It reflects light, stores memory, and withstands decay. The Atlanteans knew this. That's why their temples were topped with gold pyramids, why their tools shimmered in sunlight. The ark overlaid inside and out with pure gold becomes not just symbolic, but functional. An energy amplifier, a capacitor, perhaps even a transmitter. But to what? Atlantean myths speak of the crystal of fire hidden deep within the earth, used to power their cities. Perhaps the ark was tuned to this same energy. Perhaps it called down light, not from above, but from below, from the planetary grid once known only to the ancients. And when Atlantis fell, when the seas swallowed its high towers, this knowledge was fractured, hidden, encoded in myths, and passed as metaphor. Until one day, a boy raised in Pharaoh's court, Moses was given access to these fragments. But that is a tale for another step of our journey. Because before Moses could build the ark, it had to pass through Egypt, and Egypt was already in possession of Atlantean fire. It is in Egypt, not Jerusalem, where the whispers of Atlantean fire burn brightest. The golden thread continues here, braided into hieroglyphs, temples and rituals that most scholars mistake for myth. But those with eyes to see understand Egypt was not the origin, but the great preserver, a vault of echoes from an older world, safeguarding fragments of Atlantean wisdom in symbols that only the initiated could decode. Let us now walk through the gates of Karnak and Luxor, not as tourists, but as seekers. The priesthood of Egypt, particularly, the mystery schools of Heliopolis and Memphis, held fast to a belief that the divine could be accessed through resonance. The gods did not dwell on mountaintops, but in vibration, color, and light. Temples were built not just as places of worship, but as instruments of activation. Massive stones laid with such precision that the very air between them could sing. They spoke of a power called Sekhem, a force of life light and spiritual might. It moved through symbols, through the sacred breath, through gold and lapis and obsidian. And at the heart of their most guarded rites was a box, a radiant chest said to contain the voice of the gods. It's not hard to guess this was the precursor to the ark. Some called it the Benben stone, others the chest of Ptah. Its descriptions vary, but its function never does it, connected the earthly with the divine, the mortal with the starborn. And who held its secrets? The Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. These were no ordinary priests. They were, according to ancient texts, descendants of divine beings, Atlantean survivors who had fled the flood and carried with them sacred knowledge to rebuild a fragment of their lost homeland on Egyptian soil. They built underground vaults. They encoded sacred geometry in every column, every corridor. And they taught initiates how to interact with the divine using music movement and light. Not belief. Technique. In the Temple of Dendera, a carving shows what appears to be a large glass bulb with a coiled serpent inside. Some modern theorists claim this is proof of ancient electrical knowledge, but that's a surface reading. The deeper truth is more astonishing. The serpent is DG'd the life force. The bulb is not glass, it is the human soul. And the device holding it, an energy transducer, a vessel of divine memory. This isn't technology as we know it. It is sacred science. And the box that controlled such forces, the very design echoed in the Ark of the Covenant. Here's what they never tell you. The Egyptians had a chamber in the Temple of Karnak, known as the Chamber of the Radiant Box. It was forbidden to most accessed only by high initiates who underwent years of purification. In one of the few surviving scrolls, it is written, The chest hums with light, and when the star rises, it sings. Again, this isn't religion. It is resonance. Light, energy, vibration. The ark too was said to sing. The Levites who carried it had to follow a strict musical pattern. Every step was in rhythm, every chant in tune. Otherwise, the ark would rebel. Its force would discharge unpredictably, even lethally. This kind of control only makes sense if the ark was more than a symbol, if it was a machine. And who else but the Egyptian priesthood could have taught Moses how to build such a thing? He was raised in the palace of Pharaoh. He was educated not by Hebrew elders, but by Egyptian scribes. He learned hieroglyphs before he learned Hebrew. He stood in the temples. He heard the chants. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was initiated. When he fled Egypt, he did not leave empty-handed. He left with memory. And when years later he ascended Mount Sinai and returned with instructions to build the ark, he wasn't inventing. He was remembering. But he had to disguise it. This was not Egypt. His people had been enslaved. They were suspicious of idols, wary of sorcery. So he wrapped the ark in the language of covenant and commandment. Yet the function remained. 2 cherubim, a golden lid, poles of acacia, dimensions aligned to sacred ratios, and most crucially the command that no one but the high priest may approach it, lest they die. Why such danger for a box of stone tablets? Because it was never just about the tablets. The ark was a beacon, a transmitter, a vessel of divine frequency inherited from Egypt, which had inherited it from Atlantis. In the Book of Kings we read that when Solomon built the temple, the ark was brought into the Holy of Holies, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple like a cloud. The priests could not stand to minister. What is this glory? Why did it come like a cloud? Was it radiation plasma discharge, or the result of ancient harmonics frequencies tuned to awaken divine consciousness? Consider this: when the ark was captured by the Philistines, their idols shattered, their people fell ill. When returned, it was placed on a cart and pulled by animals. But when touched by a man Uzzah, it killed him instantly. Such behavior aligns with an unstable energy source, not a mere object of worship. The Egyptian priesthood knew this. They had once wielded such power. But by the time of Moses, their knowledge was fading. The Atlantean fire was flickering. Still its embers burned. And the ark was its final flame. But there is one more layer. The symbols carved into the ark. The cherubim, the acacia, the gold. These are not decorative. They are code. Symbols linking the ark to something far older. A celestial geometry. A portal to what the ancients called the realm of the gods. And that brings us to the next unveiling. Because once the ark entered the temple, it became something else entirely. It became a throne, a chariot, a Merkaba, and through it, the stars were not as distant as we think. Now close your eyes just for a moment and imagine the ark not as a chest, but as a vehicle. Not for carrying law, but for transporting the soul. Because once it was placed inside the temple behind the veil of the Holy of Holies, the ark ceased to be merely an object. It became a presence, a throne, a gate, a Merkaba. In Hebrew mysticism, Merkaba means chariot, but not a chariot of wheels and horses. It is a chariot of ascension, of movement between dimensions. It is the divine vehicle seen by the prophets, including Ezekiel, who described not a dusty cart, but a vision so overwhelming it burned itself into the apocalyptic soul of Scripture. Wheels within wheels, beings of fire, a dome of crystal above their heads, and beneath it all, a throne, glowing, living, radiant with light no human could endure. This was not metaphor. It was memory, a visionary fragment of the ark in full activation. The ark, you see, was never static. It was meant to move, not just across deserts, but between worlds, between layers of reality, between heaven and earth. But this truth was veiled in symbols. The cherubim atop the ark, not just angels. In Babylonian tradition, such beings were Karibu intermediaries, between gods and humans often depicted guarding sacred thresholds. Their wings did not merely cover, they generated an energy field, a resonance that allowed the presence of the divine to descend. That presence, known as the Shekinah, was often described as a light so intense it could not be looked upon. But ancient mystics knew it was more than light. It was a consciousness, a vibration, the very frequency of the Creator dwelling not in heaven, but in a cubic space of gold sound and symbol. Why a cube? Because the cube is sacred geometry made manifest. In Kabbalah, the cube is the foundation of the physical world, 6 sides, 1 center, 7 total dimensions. It is the pattern upon which reality is formed. The ark was a cube-shaped container of frequencies, a microcosm of the cosmos itself, a portable universe, a throne, and yet more. It was the interface. An ancient symbol persists through many traditions, the 6-pointed star. Today, it is known as the Star of David, but in deeper esoteric knowledge, it is the Merkabah star. 2 interlocked triangles, one pointing upward, one down, symbolizing the union of heaven and earth, spirit and matter, the divine and the human. Now ask yourself, why was this same star geometry found in Atlantean temple reliefs, in Egyptian carvings, in early Christian mosaics that predate formal doctrine? Because it points not to a religion, but to a technology of the soul. The ark and the Merkabah are not separate. They are reflections. The ark was the physical vessel. The Merkabah was the spiritual vehicle it activated. And what is the journey it initiates? Ascension, the transformation of the soul from density to light, from bondage to liberation, from illusion to divine memory. Ezekiel's vision begins when the heavens were opened. He saw a storm, a cloud fire unfolding, and inside what he could only call the likeness of a man. But he wasn't hallucinating. He was remembering, witnessing what the high priests once saw when the ark sang. There are diagrams hidden in ancient scrolls showing a cube surrounded by concentric circles, lightning bolts, and rays of light bursting upward. These are not symbolic decorations. They are instructions, blueprints for activating the ark as a stargate. The book of Revelation mentions the ark once more hidden in the temple of heaven. But John sees it not as a box. He sees thunder, lightning voices, and earthquake. The same effects described when Moses approached Sinai, when Solomon dedicated the temple, when Ezekiel beheld the Merkabah. It is always the same pattern, always the same energy. And when viewed through the lens of ancient engineering, a pattern emerges. The ark was constructed to specific dimensions, matching not only Egyptian coffer boxes, but the proportions of harmonic resonance chambers. It contained testimonies, but also rods and sacred stones, possibly crystals. It was carried by poles never touched, suggesting it generated a field, perhaps even radiation. It caused death fire and voices reminiscent of plasma discharge or scalar resonance effects. It was placed in a cubic chamber aligned to true north, the stars and sacred time. But there's more. Hidden beneath these facts is a deeper code, the path of the initiate. The ark was always veiled, hidden, approached only by the high priest once per year after intense purification. He would wear a breastplate adorned with 12 stones, each one a resonant frequency of a tribe of a star of a path. This was not costume. It was calibration, a way to attune the body, the soul, the temple, and the ark all into resonance. Only then could the veil be pierced. Only then could the ark become the Merkabah. And what did the high priest see? They never say, because some truths must be veiled even in memory. But whispers remain, that beyond the veil of the ark lies not a symbol, but a throne of stars, a gate to realms where matter and spirit merge, where Atlantis still hums in crystal dreams, where the ark still sings awaiting the pure-hearted to awaken. And perhaps it was never lost, only hidden, and now perhaps beginning to stir once more. Why has this story never been told? Why do we speak of the ark only in hushed tones of piety, never daring to question its true origin or wonder at its impossible power? Because the truth was too dangerous. Not to the soul, but to the systems of control. The church, the state, the scribes who came after, they did not fear the ark's fire. They feared its memory, its meaning, its implication. For if the Ark was more than a box, if it was the echo of Atlantean technology, the remnant of a lost cosmic science, then the foundations of doctrine crack. Then God is no longer contained within scriptures alone, but pulsing in sacred frequencies, in golden cubes, in star-born wisdom that predates the Bible itself. And that could not be allowed. Early church fathers in building orthodoxy labored not to preserve all knowledge, but to gate it. Gnostic texts that spoke of light within, of divine geometry of celestial thrones, burned. Apocryphal scrolls that traced spiritual science back through Egypt, back to Eden, back to a time before time banned, labeled heresy, buried beneath centuries of dogma. And the Ark, it vanished from history, not stolen by invaders, not hidden by kings, but erased, systematically. Because as long as it remained a symbol of power bestowed by a priesthood, it could be controlled. But if the Ark was known to be a device, a fragment of Atlantean brilliance, then the gate could open again. Not just in temples, but within each soul. That was the real danger, for the Ark does not only exist in legend, it exists as blueprint within the body, within sacred space, within the patterns of light and sound. When mystics speak of the temple within, they speak not poetically. The heart is the altar, the spine is the staff, the mind is the veil, and at the center between the wings of your own inner cherubim resides the Ark. But you were not taught this. You were taught to fear, to obey, to kneel before icons and forget the throne within. Even so, the symbols persisted in cathedral vaults shaped like star charts, in mosaics hiding six-pointed stars, in illuminated manuscripts where golden boxes glow in the margins, watched over by creatures with wings and wheels. Even in the church's efforts to suppress the truth flickered through. Whispers among Templars that the Ark was a celestial machine, that Jerusalem's true treasure was not gold, but knowledge, that the Temple Mount was built upon a gate, that the Crusades were not about land, but the retrieval of forgotten keys. In Kabbalistic texts, the Zohar speaks of a hidden light that preceded creation, a radiance too powerful for the world to receive directly, so it was placed in a vessel, a container, a sacred box. What was this vessel? The Ark. Not just as object, but as cosmic filter, the divine presence compressed into matter, into frequency, into a tool the ancients could wield. But wielding came at a cost. The Ark's power was not passive. It required purity, alignment. The unprepared were destroyed by it, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise. Like tuning a frequency, if you are off by even one harmonic, the system collapses. And so it was hidden. Not to protect us from it, but to protect it from us. But what if its reawakening has already begun? What if the reason the Ark has never been found is because it was never meant to be, not by archaeologists, not by armies, but by those who can see with inner vision, those who remember Atlantis not as fantasy, but as origin? Because maybe, just maybe, the Ark was never buried beneath the sand, sisting, but within the silence between thoughts, the sacred geometry of the soul, the sound between stars. And now, as humanity begins to awaken, as old systems crack and ancient memories resurface, perhaps the Ark is calling again, not to a nation, not to a religion, but to you, to remember, to restore, to rebuild not a temple of stone, but of spirit, not a throne of gold, but of light. So ask yourself, what if the Ark of the Covenant was never just a relic of the past? What if it is a mirror, showing you the divine technology still dormant within? What if Atlantis didn't fall to destroy knowledge, but to scatter it, so it would be remembered when the time was right? What if that time is now? Let the cherubim spread their wings once more. Let the sacred cube unfold. Let the sound return. Let the Ark awaken. And perhaps the greatest revelation is not that the Ark came from Atlantis, but that Atlantis still lives within you.